Today we're talking about Katabasis. JK, I would never switch up on you guys. Also, I could never be nonchalant. If you want to read Katabasis, which you definitely should, I think it's like an instant New York Times bestseller and all of that stuff. And it's R.F Kuang, she's really, really good. And she's so famous for a good reason. Then you definitely should read it, and you should definitely not watch this video because it's going to be full of spoilers. But also because I'm going to be talking about the book not from the perspective of a reader and enjoying the reading experience, but more from the perspective of someone who's been trying to write, and how this kind of was my entry point for that. And the reason for that is I loved reading R.F Kuang's other book called Yellowface. I actually went into it without too much background, and I was just completely floored. Like, I think the way she does the narration of the book so Yellowface is super popular. It's about this white woman who steals the work of her Asian friend who's a really successful writer and who passes away right in front of her. So she sees her friend die, this friend that she's always been kind of like jealous of. So she steals her work and then she publishes it as her own. And then there's like all of these things that come up, like it's just such a good story. The plot obviously is very interesting, but also the internal narrative of the lady who stole the book and who's white and all of that stuff is just super, super interesting. So I got cut off, but I really enjoyed Yellowface, and so I was sure that I was going to enjoy this one as well. But as a reader, I'll just quickly like give you my take on it. Katabasis is basically about these two grad students, Alice Law and Peter Murdoch, and they're studying at Cambridge in this kind of fictional version of Cambridge where analytical magic is the field that they're studying. And they decide to journey to hell. So Katabasis, actually, the word itself means the journey into hell. And the reason that they're going to hell is because their advisor has passed away and they want to rescue him. And I think just as a world and as a premise, it's so interesting. Like, I really enjoy academia books. I wouldn't say dark academia because I haven't really enjoyed most of those books, but I love books that are set in academic settings. I love academic rivals to lovers. Like, that's one of my favorite tropes in the world. And I think R.F Kuang just like talks about the whole like PhD system and master's, like just being a part of the university in such an interesting way because she understands it so well. So it's just a really interesting world. I think the magic system was a really interesting one. So the way that they do magic is they come up with like riddles and paradoxes and stuff like that. And then there's also, because it's a paradox, it's also like logical language, maths, linguistics, all of this stuff. And they say basically like you have to draw like a pentagram with a paradox in it, and you trick the world into behaving slightly differently for a bit because the paradox like confuses you, the magician, and it confuses the world as well. So you can like get it to glitch and kind of like do different things. I thought that was an amazing concept for magic. I would love to see like more books kind of explore that system of magic because it's just so well done. And like the book starts off with like, oh, it's like the first week of Michaelmas term or something. So, and I just love that she like from the get-go lets us know that it's kind of like the real world, but it's not entirely the real world, which I thought was great. But as a reader, I felt that the book is about like 500 something pages, and I really felt it didn't have to be like, it just really felt like it dragged on and on for me. So her concept of hell is that there are 7 circles of hell. So the whole like Dante's hell and all of that stuff, and she references all of these works, which is also like one of the things that I enjoyed. Like, it was really cool. She talked about like Orpheus as a scholar, and she talks about Dante, and she talks about all of these stories and mythologies that we know, and just not the Western canon ones alone, but also she brings in like, East Asian ones and Indian myths. Like, the god is called, like the god of the underworld is called King Yama, which I thought was really cool because like Yamadeva is like, a Hindu god, but I think there's also like an East Asian version of him, which I thought was really cool. Anyway, But the seven circles of hell, I think, in a way, like tied her hands because she had to describe all seven circles in a way, and you can kind of see that she doesn't want to because she like takes some loopholes through it. And I feel like that part of the world building didn't really work for me at all because, like, in Percy Jackson and stuff like that, right? You do have modern takes or renditions of like these mythologies, but there's enough care and thought taken there that those new versions become exciting. You know, like when they go to the Lotus Casino or whatever. That's like an interesting take on a familiar, like mythological concept, but it's still unfamiliar in a way as well. But I I feel like she did kind of do that in the first two circles of hell, and then it just kind of petered off. And I think it petered off for a good reason because if she was like, oh, and this is what the sixth circle of hell looks like, and this is what the fifth circle of hell looks like, and went into that world building each and every single time, it would have been an even longer book. And that wasn't actually the main point of what she was doing. Like I think if she arranged hell differently, it actually would have helped her. Like, I mean, who am I to tell R.F Kuang what to do? But from my perspective, I did feel like that was too much world building because she was already building this world of the university for us. And I guess that is the deeper point that I'm trying to make is that so she starts the book right in the middle or like right in the midst of the action, which is them going to hell. Like they're doing the spell and they're gonna go to hell. And I love that in books. I love when authors just like jump right in and they're like, come along for the ride and I will tell you what's going on. But I think that didn't entirely pan out in this book for me because we exit Cambridge as like the first thing that we do in the book, right? But these two characters are from Cambridge, and Cambridge looms so large as the institution and like the setting of where everything has happened and why they would be even going here, like why they value their advisor enough to like go to the underworld and rescue him. But you don't spend any time in Cambridge physically. So everything that you have to learn about it, you have to learn about it when they're in hell and like kind of as flashbacks and stuff like that. So she's building Cambridge as a world and she's building the underworld and she's to build every circle of hell, which is obviously distinct. And I think that just becomes too much. Like I think because of that, she's able to do Cambridge justice, like it really comes to life, but I don't think she's able to do hell justice. But at the same time, she can't completely let it go because it's obviously a very interesting landscape and she does have some really, really cool ideas about it. It's just that the ideas don't have space to really breathe, and so you kind of are left feeling incomplete about like, oh, but what is what does the fourth circle or the fifth circle really look like? So I think that was one of my problems with it. I think another part of it, and this is kind of like a more structural thing, and where I'm going to talk about some of the other books I've been reading. I think there are some books that are, I think, whether it's written this way or not, like the way it comes off is that some books are written for like the enjoyment of the reader. Like it is somewhere a consideration that the author has taken in this like account, or it just like kind of spontaneously happens in their style. And these are books that we enjoy reading, right? Like Percy Jackson, for example, that I just mentioned. It has the right kind of pacing and plotting and characters and locations and things like that that authors know are going to be pleasurable for people to read. But I think there's also a different kind of book, and that different kind of book is one where you have a point to make or a truth that you want to communicate, and so you're doing that and you're not really concerned with whether the reader is going to enjoy that. You're more concerned with how true to the fact of what you're trying to represent it actually is. And I don't think either of these books are wrong, like at all. I think I've loved books in either style. And here I actually want to talk about one of the books that I've been reading. Aqua Viva by Clarice Lispector. I've heard so much about this author, and this was probably not the right first book of hers to pick up. But this book is, I wouldn't even say stream of consciousness, though like I probably should look up what the term is, but it is in that vein of like just dumping on the page, like with a lot of immediacy, exactly what is going through her mind, with no consideration for like plot or characters or coherence even, but it's very enjoyable because it is kind of exploring the limits of time, and or it's exploring the experience of time and the limits of language, I would say. So it's a very, very interesting book, but it's also a very experimental book. Like, it's not a book that you enjoy reading for its plot and things like that. And I think the reader's enjoyment wasn't really taken into consideration when it was written. But is it like pleasurable to read? Yes, like the motions of language and the kind of thought that arises from this, the concepts that are explored. It is a pleasurable read, but it is not for pleasure. It is for representing this author's thought and her experience of time, like as she writes it, right? So that's kind of the distinction that I'm trying to make. I would contrast that to another book that I'm currently reading. Don't ask me why I'm reading all these books at the same time, but like it has helped me a lot to do that. I have wanted to read To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf for the longest time. I actually watched this like philosophy talk in high school about like what makes life meaningful to live, and it ended with this passage from To the Lighthouse about the light hitting the waves. And then it was like that moment of beauty and that moment of presence is enough. Like that justifies living life. And I don't know why, but I don't remember where the talk was from, but it struck me so much at that age, and it like convinced me. It was like, yeah, life is worth living because of that, which is a pretty big like leap to make, I guess, or thing to be convinced of. And I was like a big philosophy freak at the time. Like I wanted to major in philosophy and all of that stuff too. So it was interesting that this was kind of the thing that did it. But when I started reading this, I remembered that I actually had tried to read it before, but I never could fully get into it. Obviously, Virginia Woolf is an amazing author, but the stream of consciousness that she's known for is on full display in this book. And it is kind of disconcerting. Like, it is pleasurable because of like external reasons, like your own reasons to find it pleasurable. But the point is not, I would say, entirely pleasure. The point is stream of consciousness is a new way of writing, and it's an exploration of how our consciousness works, like what it's like to be you, like convincing someone else of that. And it is a little jumbled, right? Like in Lice Spector's book, you know, in other books you can sometimes like start thinking about your own thing. You can be like, oh, I need to like do this, or I have to talk to this person and this person said that. In this book you can't, because like when you do that in other books you can catch the thread of the plot again, but here there is no plot. Like the experience of her consciousness is what you're reading the book for. So if you let your consciousness drift off and like think about other things, you can't like do both. It takes your full attention. I would say To the Lighthouse doesn't do that as much, which is why it's kind of like a midway point for me personally. I think from like a traditional book to like a completely experimental book, because it is experimenting with stream of consciousness, but it still does give you some kind of plot, characters, like settings, things that are happening, which makes it a little bit easier to follow, which has been interesting. I'm gonna come back to this when I actually read it more. It was interesting though, because I've been reading a lot of James Wood. I started with Serious Noticing, and then I came to How Fiction Works. And I'm actually on the essay that's about the free indirect style. And there are parts where Virginia Woolf, like in brackets, will tell us who a thought belongs to, because she like skips, like she goes between different people. And I'm like, you don't have to do that. Like, I know that you're capable of not doing that because you haven't done it in every part of the text. So I wish you wouldn't do it here either, because it's kind of like breaking your style. And I think that's something that I've become conscious of because of James Wood and like the way that he writes about style and narration and stuff like that, which I think has been fun for me as someone who makes these videos and enjoys talking about books. But going back to Katabasis, and the reason that I brought up these two different kinds of books is that this distinction I think is important for me to understand, because it also affected the way that I read A Calculation of Volume, which was actually the first book that I made this book club video series about. And On A Calculation of Volume is about this lady who is stuck in a time loop. She's stuck in the same day over and over again. and I came away from the book, even though it's a tiny, like, thin book, I came away feeling really bored, like, for large sections of it. And then when I was making the video, I was like, I didn't enjoy reading the book, but that's kind of besides the point, because the feeling she was trying to evoke was boredom. Like, I mean, if you're stuck in a time loop, you would feel bored, right? Like, that's kind of like a defining characteristic of a time loop. So she's able to communicate the truth of that experience, which was like more important to her than like entertaining us constantly through the book, right? And I think something similar of Katabasis, but almost because of the reputation of R.F Kuang and the kind of commercial success that she's had. I haven't read her, like, all of her other books, but I have read Yellowface. And the fact that this was an instant bestseller and all of that stuff, and like dark academia is like this, like, you know, big viral trending book subtype or whatever. Like, the book had to be entertaining and it had to be popular almost. But a lot of Katabasis, and this is like a big spoiler, but Alice Law, who's the main character, is like severely depressed. And she's suicidal, is what it is, right? And I've described the premise of the book to you guys, like when I started out, of like, oh, these two grad students, they like go to hell to like rescue their advisor and stuff. And that's how the book has been marketed in a lot of ways. And it sounds so fun, right? Or it sounds so like interesting, but actually, like, when you get into the book, again, there's like way more spoilers here, but their advisor is a horrible person, like horrible in every way that you're expecting him to be horrible, and then some. And her going down there, like, for most of the book, you're like, oh, she's trying to save him, or like, but why is she trying to save him? Does she have like a Stockholm syndrome thing? What is it? Because we know that he's horrible like pretty early on, but like not the extent to which he's horrible. And then it gets really grim, like her reason for like wanting to like talk to him again. It's like kind of a revenge kind of thing. And it's just, and then like the whole concept of like, oh, she's going to hell, like to rescue her advisor, so clearly becomes an instance of like an unreliable narrator, and she's telling herself that she's doing this, and then we realize like, oh, she's suicidal. But it takes us longer to realize that, almost because of the way that the book is marketed, which is very unfortunate, but also because the book is trying to straddle both worlds. Like, it is trying to entertain you and be popular, but at the same time it's trying to make you experience her experience of being depressed, suicidal, like dealing, like a major theme in the book is memory, like memory, and like you'll kind of see in the book like why memory is such a big thing for her. Like, she has this ability to like not forget things at all, and you find out in the book like why she has that ability. And then the river, Lethe, whatever, the river of forgetting in the underworld, right? That's super famous, and like how tempting that river is for her, but at the same time how threatening it is, because it is like erasure completely, and how she kind of craves that erasure but she can't have it, like all of these different thoughts. And I think it falls more into the category of books that are trying to make you feel the experience that they're describing, which is one of depression and not being able to come out of this like loop that she's in, and trying to find meaning almost desperately. Like, so much of the book that felt like it was dragging to me was in those sections where she's desperately trying to find a reason to live and trying to justify existence to herself, right? Like, and it's interesting because I kind of absentmindedly mentioned this video that I watched in high school of like, is life worth living, and like trying to find all these reasons to do it, but like she's describing a philosopher's world, right? And one thing that this book does really, really well is that it describes it in its own terms. Like, James Wood talks about how there are certain authors that will create metaphors that are in the language or tone of the world that they're set in, and then the characters that they're talking about. So you're not really sure if the metaphor is the author's or if it's the character's metaphor, but either way it makes sense within the world, you know? And that's actually something that I've been struggling with a lot in my book, because I feel like I think about poetry and stuff like that, or poetry, art, other books, quotations, all of that stuff all the time. And so the entry point for me for a lot of like epiphanies or character development and stuff like that, I want to like quote a poem and be like, because of this, she thought of this, blah, blah, blah. But I've made the protagonist just like someone who has like a nondescript like corporate job. And I don't want to make her too literary because then I feel like there's a whole other angle that will come in, blah, 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 all that stuff. So then I can't quote, like, she's not a character who would know these poems by heart or like be narrating them or like thinking about them. So those are not metaphors or like anchors that I can bring into the story. But Katabasis does it really well because like all the meanings and all of the like internal monologues and stuff like that, they emerge from logic and from paradox and from well-known paradoxes like Zeno's paradox and stuff like that, which I thought was so interesting and so well done. And like, props to R.F Kuang. Like, I know she's like famous and she doesn't need these props from anyone, but like how immersed she is in this world, not just of academia but of logic and paradox, and the way that it forces you to think about certain things too. I just like the richness of the world that she created intellectually, like drawing on all of these like Ramanjanan's summation and this thing and that thing. I was just like, man, the amount of research you put into this is absolutely crazy, and it sounds so authentic. It doesn't sound like just things that are thrown around. Like sometimes she would like describe, like there's a character called Helen Murray. She's like a professor or something. I was like, I know this professor. Like, she's based off of a real person. Like, I read a New Yorker profile of this lady. Like, one of the details is like she runs marathons, and while she's running, she listens to operas in her head. And I was like, I've read that. I've read that in someone's New Yorker profile. I know that's a real female philosopher. I just can't remember who it is, which like really drove me insane. But it just feels like a very rich tapestry and a very true one as well, which I think was interesting. And talking about the world on its own terms of logic and paradox also, I think, brought in such an interesting lens to the language and to the plot and to the character herself. But yeah, I just feel like that is the reason that I didn't really enjoy it as a reader, because it was trying to show us the experience of being suicidal and depressive, which are not enjoyable experiences. And so it was more about being true to showing what it was representing, which is still an interesting and worthwhile experience to have. It's just not a pleasurable read. So it kind of felt like the book was straddling both worlds, or because of the marketing, you were expecting it to be one thing and then it was actually another thing. And that's also why the length of the book felt like it was two books like smashed together. It felt like the truth of the book was that depressive suicidal part where she's trying to like grasp with meaning, and then this like construction of the plot around it was added on to make it a marketable, pleasurable book. And so then it just kind of was both but also wasn't both. But yeah, so that was my experience of reading Katabasis by R.F Kuang. It's a super, super, super interesting book. When I was in high school, I did summer school at Brown, and the course that I did was called Logic and Paradox, and it introduced me to this like beautiful, amazing world of like mathematical notation and philosophical thinking, and just like how interesting these paradoxes are and how they can push your brain in like different directions. And it was so interesting being back in that world again through this book. I think the romance didn't really work for me. Like, I was ready for it to work for me. Like, I was so keen. I was reading this book because I was having a shitty week, and I just, like, the reason I'm not holding the book up is because I read it on my Kindle. And all of my other books have been like a part of my syllabus. Like, I've been like very focused on reading certain kinds of books, which is why I have all of the copies. Like, I've planned it out. But I was just having a really shitty week, and I was like, I just need a book that like make me not think about anything. So even though I was carrying these books, I was like, oh, just like I need a specific kind of book, like something I can sink my teeth into and like not think while I read it. And when I saw that Katabasis by R.F Kuang was out, I was like, oh, this is obviously the book that's gonna do that. And in a way it did. I think it's at least the first like 30 to 40% of the book, I think, like really drew me in. I was so ready for the romance. I was just like, give me academic rivals to lovers, like any day of the week, I am ready for it. but I feel like there was just too much going on in the book to build the romance as well. Like, I think there was good bones, but just not enough space to let them all like breathe and kind of like to mix metaphors, I guess. But yeah, definitely read it if you're interested in like academia books and stuff. It does drag a little bit in the middle, but I think that in itself, like if you treat it as a separate slice of the book, is very interesting because she is grappling with a lot of very interesting concepts. I just wish, I almost feel like R.F Kuang's reputation is so big that she couldn't have written this book in any other way. But I kind of wish that, like, I recently read James Baldwin and I did a video on that, and in the introduction I read how people were like, this is a death knell, like if you write this book your career's over because you can't jump from this topic to that, like as a black author how can you write a book with no black characters in it, all of that stuff. And then he was like, no, like this is the book I'm going to write and I'm just going to publish it. And I feel like this is so presumptuous of me, but I feel like R.F Kuang has this kind of book which is entertaining and pleasurable to read in her. Clearly, like there's such an interesting plot, such an interesting world, all of that stuff. But she also has this other kind of book within her of like just representing something truthfully, of like how it feels without any of the trappings of plot and all of that stuff necessarily. You can obviously have it, like To the Lighthouse does, but it's more about this than it is about that. And I feel like R.F Kuang has this side of the equation as well, and we kind of saw that in this book. But I hope, like selfishly, that she comes out with a book that is embracing this side of just like, this is how it feels to be depressed or suicidal, or how consciousness feels or time feels, like whatever it is. Like she has that ability which not a lot of people have, and I wish she would come out with a book that explored just that one side, and she didn't feel any pressure to make it pleasurable or like reader oriented or anything like that, because I think that would be really interesting from her. And at the same time, selfishly, I want more books that are set in this kind of world of analytical magic, because I just think it's a really interesting world, like deserves a lot more exploration and stuff like that. So yeah, I have like 2 book requests from R.F Kuang that are like across the spectrum completely. But yeah, thank you so much for listening.